Alright, hi guys, my name is Borodante, and welcome to The Mask, little big commission we worked on together with Nadiia. And there was a lot of people involved in this project, and our part was about modeling the mask using the concept drawing that was provided to us, and to give the actual 3D animated and tracked animation of the mask for the future compositing and editing for people who do that. So our part was to turn the two-dimensional concept drawing into the actual 3D mask that is following the face. This is like, we ended up working on, I believe, 4 shots. All of this was done purely in Blender. So let me show you guys how all of this worked out. Maybe it will be interesting to someone if you guys work or want to work on commissions like that. But let's first look at the other shots of this. So pretty much these short videos were made for this artist. Her name is Adiel. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. But yeah, the actual music in the shorts, I'm not sure if I'll be able to actually let you guys hear it in the video, I guess not, but you can see it in her Instagram. The links are in the description for everyone involved in the project. But yeah, here's another shot we did. It's fun to see the final version right now. It's a lot more saturated because we were working with more of a flat, raw footage. And yeah, as I said, this is actually Adiel. We just got her, you know, just the face, and we had to make it work like this. Obviously, this is not hyper realistic or anything. Also, generally, the project was very fast, so it was very interesting how we could make it all work, you know, as simple yet as effective as possible. Now the next shot, there's several versions for each of these shots, including of course a vertical version like this, which looks kind of cool, and a rectangular as well. I'm not sure if it was used anywhere. I guess in an actual regular post on Instagram this would look awesome. But yeah, here's one more shot in here. Masking out the nose was quite interesting, which was done in a very brute force way of just using a 3D shape that I was sculpting to make sure it fits just right. You can kind of see in sharp shadows how the nose shape is like not exactly perfectly in sync. I actually recommended to maybe use that shadow pass and to maybe use like blurring of like 5 pixels or maybe a little bit more. In Full HD, I think 5 pixels worked just fine when I was testing it in Premiere Pro. Just to apply that kind of little blur on the shadow pass, so it would just, you know, avoid those very sharp geometry details on the shadow. But apparently they ended up just going with the sharp version of everything, which is like, again, totally fine. I really think I'm the only one who's seeing this. Not to mention that the art style of this is very like surreal. And yeah, I'm loving the masking of the hair that like I had to do it using After Effects, because this was like, this head was in the actual 3D space, so things would be able to wrap around the head like that. So yeah, this is actually like the folder of the project, and you guys can see I have this After Effects folder, Blender folder, footage folder. This is what was given to us. Yeah, pretty much blank shots like this. And out is all the tests or like previews or demo shots that we did, just quickly compositing and showing the result. And final sequences is actually what we sent over to the compositing team. And pretty much it consisted of this. This is like on transparency, right? So this is a transparent background there. So this is how things went this way. And each shot also had this shadow folder. And if we go to the middle, it looks like this. And this is actually very interesting. This is thanks to latest updates to the shadow catcher pass. In Blender, we were able to provide this colorful shadow. You guys can see there's blue caustics or whatever there was like going on, some kind of blue glowing material Nadiia prepared, and like reddish shadows from those red metallic details. So it's actually colorful, and also there's even like, it's not just shading, but also brightening things up. So this is actually like no difference color, and this means it's getting a bit brighter. So that's really cool. And that was introduced in one of the updates of Blender 3, I think, maybe just literally with Blender 3.0, they added the ability for this colorful shadow catcher pass. The in Premiere Pro folder is just the actual compositing project where I was putting everything together. Hey, it all opened. Awesome. But yeah, right here we have this shadow layer, and this is how it's applied. So it's providing this colorful shadow here. And yeah, again, this is not the final footage you guys are seeing. This is not color graded or anything. This is my just preview of the result. And yeah, this is another reason why I would recommend like blurring out the actual shadow pass, because we were just using a sharp head like that, but I think it was all covered up with, yeah, like the top of the mask is hiding that anyway, so it wasn't seen in the final result. But yeah, like Gaussian blur of 5 pixels. Oh yeah, actually, so the work I was doing was actually done in 4K. So the footage was provided in 4K, and we rendered everything in 4K. But I think the final shots that were published online, they were in Full HD. So that's why I was saying like 5 pixels would be enough. In here, it's not enough. It needs to be at least 20 to soften things up a bit. So yeah, this, like, it looks fine when there's actual objects in there, but this way, yeah, a little bit softer. It still looks realistic and everything, but it would allow to avoid a little bit of these, like, maybe sometimes visible inconsistencies, like this, just softer like this. I think it's a good idea to do that when you're not trying to perfectly replicate all the geometry of the face of the actress. In most cases, it looked really good, especially in this shot. And yeah, so that's what's in these folders. After Effects is where I was, also there's inside the renders, that's where I was rendering the actual masks. So this is again on transparency here. I don't know if I can show you guys. Oh, there you go. That's how you see it. So this is cut out like this. Super happy that I live in the age where you can just click one button in After Effects, quickly draw a simple line over the silhouette, and it will just perfectly cut out with transparencies. So we've got all this masking going on this way, and it was just beautifully cutting out everything. So yeah, that's what I was doing here. I was doing the masks, and also I was doing the tracking. That was the most exciting and complex part about the project, to making sure the 3D mask would be perfectly moving with the head when Adiel actually wasn't wearing any kind of tracking equipment or any kind of markers on the face, nothing at all. So this is just the footage we got, just her head, and pretty much that's it. I actually, I don't know, like 6 months ago, or maybe a bit less, I made a video. It was about how to track things in After Effects to get like perfect tracking without any markers and with really good quality. And that's where I was using, like, this was the project that I wasn't able to talk about back then. That's where I used it. That's where I had to trick After Effects into thinking that the head is actual environment, like background, because I was just tracking the 3D camera. So out of After Effects, I was receiving the movement of the 3D camera with a static head, which worked, but I still needed to convert that into actual moving head with a static camera. And that video about how to do it describes the whole trick of how to convert it in Blender. So yeah, right here, if I hide it, this is the actual just video projected for the camera, right? So I would be able to see what I'm doing. But then on top of it, there's also this cutout transparent head. Also, it's a holdout object, so it's only like for masking. So yeah, right now we're not seeing any change, and that's because this object right here, this mask, it's an asset. So I need to relink it. So for that, I would go right here. That's like, again, what you do if you move the project and it doesn't work. We had to do it several times because many of the shots or parts of the shots I was rendering on Nadia's laptop as well. So in here, we find missing files. And in this case, I want to point to this folder because these things are required. And here we are. So we just loaded in. I was using assets, so I would be able to update and change certain things about the mask. And boy, did we do that a lot, by the way. Introduce certain changes to the way the mask looks, the way the mask moves, and stuff like that. And it would update in all the shots, all the 4 or 5 shots we were doing. All of them had the same mask every time because this was the same asset they were connected to. Again, this is a prepared asset, so you don't actually edit anything in here, like all of this like a solid thing. You can't get into the edit mode or anything. But when you grab the mask's handle right here, and you see there's some stuff going on, I prepared several properties in here to work with this mask. So we have a face mask that's like actually one of the versions involved like a stone face, but we ended up not using it. Then there's nothing at all, just the mask on blank. And also this mode, we can see it right here very vaguely. You can see a little bit of a wireframe. And this is that shadow catcher, like smooth face we had in here to be able to catch some of those simple shadows that were later added on top of the footage. Oh, right. So in compositing, it's quite a complex project. I forgot about that. But yeah, right here, we get this one render and we get image out of it and we get shadow catcher out of it. And when you're using shadow catcher, when you actually export it, that's when your actual image won't have the shadow catcher shadows in it because it knows you're saving shadows in a separate place. So this is how things were set up generally. But yeah, what's also cool, like this is the shot where the mask is actually appearing out of nowhere. And it involved a lot of things, but in the actual scene right here, all I had to do was to animate this one slider right here. And this is doing like all of it at the same time. So you just drag the thing in time. So all of the animation of appearance, I prepared in the asset, and it was just controlled with this one slider. And also, when you are working with this, you can control spawn randomization. So things could show up from like different places or different scales, and then things would do a bit of a different thing. So we were able to show, different ways of things could show up. Also, spawn scattering. This is the actual like movement into different places. And yeah, this is rigid body influence, like how much these chains would lag from the movement of the head. And this is the reason why I needed to make sure that the actual head is moving in the 3D scene instead of the camera faking it and moving on its own. So originally the head was like one point in space, and the camera was moving around, faking all of this movement. I used a certain series of actions with constraints and like parenting to make sure the object starts moving while the camera can stand still. Now back to the mask, let me open up the asset right here. So we can open Blender file like this. Alright, here we go, and yeah, this is pretty much what it looks like, and oh my god, I forgot how complex all of this was. So, first of all, geometry nodes. So, geometry nodes were used for the whole animation of appearance. And yeah, there's several objects right here, geometry node objects. And if you go to their modifiers in here, like these like floating sliders and everything, this is what you feed like these different things. Like this is how it's affected by the floating. This is the noise of that floating, like how much of it is shaking around. Because some of the objects, like these leaves or something like that, they like do this deformation with time, right? The way I do it now for the foliage in Unreal Engine using world position offset, this is pretty much the same thing. All of this stuff is involved in these simple coordinates changing and everything. And on top of that, it's also involved in all these appearance movements. So these big objects right here have this spawn slider, and that's what you end up being able to animate. All of that is controlled together by this master object of the mask handle through drivers. That's why this is violet. And here's the spawn slider right here. So you end up controlling several other objects using this one object. That's how you kind of prepare your rig. And yeah, the chains were one of the most interesting things to do, because they needed not only to, you know, be animated like this, and it couldn't be just geometry nodes, because we needed them to deform not like by squishing everything all kinds of ways. We needed to actually move the curve that is used to build these chains. So right here in the actual chains folder, you can see it's all like live actual chain. It's not perfect still, like at certain angles and extreme twists, it would deform the shapes as well, and they would like morph. But we did our best to avoid that, to move the chain in a way that it wouldn't be affecting as much. Also, there are settings when you extrude a shape or like bend the shape with a curve. So this is originally the way the mesh is, and then it's deformed with a chain. But there are settings on the curve itself that you can use about like smoothing it. I think this stuff, yeah, you can see it's like affecting the way things are following it. Also, the resolution affected things. And yeah, if I disable the chain effect, and also I would show these guys right here, we'll see these boxes, and these boxes are Boolean boxes for the chains, because when they show up from behind the head, they need to like be cut off somewhere. And so before the actual deformation with a chain, at first they just move from the right to the left, like being first completely cut off by the Boolean box. If I move the spawn, this is the way the chain is going away and is being cut off by this box. And like generally, I found it to be the easiest way to do it. At the beginning, all the chains are hidden behind these boxes. If I would turn off all the curve modifiers on them, this is what it would look like. And then at first all the leaves and flowers show up, and then the chains start flowing in. So this is the kind of setup for just the chains appearing. But that's not even the whole story about it, because if we look at the way the chains are moving, as I said, I couldn't use the geometry nodes for this. We were using hooks. Right here we had fixed hooks and floating hooks. And you can't use geometry nodes on hooks because these are not geometry, and they actually need to, you know, move with transformation of an object. And for that, I had to use animation nodes, which is a separate big plugin that is like free and open source and whatever, I think. You can look up Blender animation nodes. It's a whole other like separate world. They don't create like a copy. They don't do the thing that geometry nodes do, where they're just a modifier instead of one object, and their result of the geometry nodes is just the mesh of this one object. In here, you're just grabbing certain objects from like a collection, for instance, like right here, floating hooks. I just grab all the objects from floating hooks, and I ended up just you know, transforming these objects, like transforming their location, rotation, and scale. That's something you can't do with geometry nodes. You can duplicate those objects in geometry nodes and move them, their vertices, inside of this new other object, but to actually move certain separate objects in the scene, you have to use like animation nodes, and that's like a big difference. So what I pretty much did here, I applied a bunch of like random numbers, like pretty much like a noise that was applied to the location and rotation of these hooks. And that's how they ended up moving in space like this. Right here in curves, this is the actual movement that I baked. So each of these guys have this movement, but I used NLA because I then needed to grab all these animations and move to like 3000 something frame, because each scene, it like starts like in here at like almost 500. And in here, everything ended at a frame like 700 something. So in order to be able to move all of this at the same time, I needed to like use NLA to easily just grab these strips and move them where I needed them. Like this, I moved all of the strips here, so as you move them in time, they're just ready to be animated wherever you want them to be. But yeah, like all these appearances were really cool to, you know, set up this animation in geometry nodes. Of course, it's like fairly simple, but like it worked out just fine for, again, this real style of this effect. But yeah, in here, I had to go through all the objects and make sure I set the origins to like the beginning, like where those objects were supposed to grow from, kind of like this, because I was using scale transformation for the appearance of these objects. So these petals right here on the forehead as well, I had to move all of them. And at first, like, I had to really figure out how to do it quickly, because it felt like a super slow thing to do. So the way to do it actually is very cool. In here in Tool, there's this toggle for origins. And when you do that, when you hit G and start moving the object, you actually start only moving the origin. Then I used the tweak mode of the main tool right here, and I used the projection to the volume. So this way, when you just click on an object, you immediately start moving it, and you start actually moving the origin this way. And volume lets you snap the origin exactly in the middle of the volume of where you're pointing. So if I would like point it, say right here on this object, so I'm literally, the moment I click on an object, it's using the volume of this object, and it's moving the actual origin of the object. So this is what it looks like. You see, it's like not on the surface, it's in the middle of the volume of this object. So it's really cool. It was pretty quick to just quickly click and drag, click and drag, click and drag, you know, to move things into the right place. And yeah, that's how I ended up setting the whole thing up with the actual mask rig. And the actual timing and tracking and masking out things on the footage was done separately here, so I had a nice separation of complex issues like all of this rig of the mask in one file, and the scene-specific, footage-specific stuff was done in the actual scene file. And yeah, as I said, this one scene where the mask was just appearing, it was a fairly simple one because, you know, the camera is pretty far away from the face. It's just a frontal shot, and everything is just in front. And I just simply had to render out this stuff, just the 3D and the shadow catcher. But I also want to show you guys the way I rendered something more complicated. And this is, by the way, one of the shots where I realized the first time I really needed to use After Effects for, like, I needed to use something for tracking, because imagine, like, how do you track this face right here with like Blender? There's no markers or anything. This is insane. So there's a holdout layer in this scene, and there's also a shadow layer in this scene. And I needed two of them because in this shot right here, I needed to only cut out the face together with this plane of like the transparent hair and everything that's blended together like this It's like this weird mix of things. You can see it like this, right? So the plane is the holdout and the head is the holdout. But yeah, the point is it was like this complex blend because I needed to cut out the perfect 3D nose and cast shadows on it. So cutout needed to happen here and shadow casting was going on here without that cutting out plane, because that plane would mess up the whole thing with the shadows on the nose. So in here, I was only rendering those shadows on the nose, like this. In here it's appearing black and white because it's in the preview, but when you actually render with compositing, this will be showing those colorful shadows like this. For the holdout layer, I had certain things showing up, and for the shadow layer, holdout was hidden, and shadow catcher things were showing up. And yeah, the whole simulations of things. By the way, another very experimental thing that I had to hack so many things to make sure it worked, setting up rigid bodies that are inside of the head in here, rigid body world. So these two objects, oh, they're big ones, right? They used to be small, then I make them really big. But pretty much these two boxes, one of them is the box that is moving around attached to the head, and another one is like spring constrained as a rigid body in here on the mask handle itself. I have this rigid body constraint that's connecting the reference and the spring boxes. And these settings right here define how much is like lagging from the other box. And then to this lagging box, I was parenting a lot of things like the hooks of the curves for the chains. Like these guys, they're parented to this rigid body object. So all of these moving hooks were doing that on top of also having their floating thing from the animation nodes. And all of this, like I just imported the asset, and suddenly these rigid bodies were supposed to work with the rigid body world of this scene project, which was like the biggest thing, like, will I be able to do it? But pretty much you prepare two separate collections, rigid body world and rigid body constraints, and you define them in here. So you make sure you use these imported linked collections to set things up. So sounds simple, but it was really hard to figure it out because actually the scale of the head right here is very big. So this right here is 10 meters tall. And in the asset file where I was preparing the rig of the mask was like super small, like several centimeters. It's a very tiny mask initially. A huge change in scale, like more than 100 times difference. And because of that, rigid bodies apparently don't work very well when they're in a very tiny scale. Like the whole spring thing just doesn't work at all. And I was like, why isn't it not working? In the asset file it was working, in here it isn't. In the end, it turned out that because they were so tiny, and as I said, these two were actually originally inside of the head very tiny two boxes that was like another 10 times smaller, and they just didn't work together because of that simply. So then I just switched to using these boxes as like very big scale like this, and it just ended up working. So if for whatever reason your rigid bodies just won't work even if you have everything set up correctly, the problem may be in the fact that somewhere there's a very, very tiny scale. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Hope it was useful. Generally, you know, about the way I was setting things up and this complex kind of a thing that we had to prepare here with all the masking and tracking and shadow catchers, and it really involved a lot of things with the simulations and the animations of hooks and like the chains and everything, rigid bodies on top of that, like so many things involved in this one project. It was a lot of fun to make all of this work together, and once again I was so blown away by how Blender just lets you do all of this. So yeah, this is it. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye! I really love what they did with the background color. If you guys noticed in the footage, it was like more of a violet pale thing, and in here it's like this modern flashy teal blue kind of thing. Looks pretty dope.